Making a video. Graph science video. This responds to Hofferday's video and comments. I guess we'll get to that shortly, hopefully. I'll play some of Hofferday's video just out of political correctness, but for no other reason. This is just rubbish. Basically the argument from take it or leave it. Either take the entire package of physics or take nothing. But you can't sit there and find mistakes. You can't find pieces that are wrong. If you find one piece wrong, it means you're saying everything's wrong. And if you say one piece is right, that means you're saying everything's right. I mean, it's that stupid. Just just useless mush. It's kind of claiming that there's some sort of rule that you can't do what I have done, which is see a statement being made by physics or science and say that doesn't make sense, and then you look into it and you see that it's not based on anything called a volume of evidence, and it's just based on an assumption that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. One way of understanding a mechanism, and that you can understand it lots of other different ways. You can explain the phenomena different ways. And there wasn't any great contest between the different ways, and the best way won or any of that crap never took place. Everybody just jumped on a bandwagon, and that became the established truth. So I haven't done anything. I haven't done a single thing out of step, in the sense of you find something wrong, you critique the experiment that establishes its proof, and you point out if it's weak, and you point out its weaknesses, and that's what I've done. And then because I have an alternative explanation, I've pointed out the strengths of the alternative explanation, and that you have to modify what you think, just like they should have modified Benjamin Franklin's impression of what was positive and what was negative, because yes, he had them backwards, and it'd be good to fix that. Little things like that. But yes, it's just this whole this sappy attitude that it works for us. Well, the fact that it works for you doesn't mean that you even know what works is. Physics could do so much more, maybe, if you had right premises. You just don't know what you could do with the right answer instead of just a working answer. So even that's just a display of ignorance. It's like saying meat eating works for me. You know, when there could, if it's true that other sentient organisms, that there's no rational reason to assume their suffering is meaningless, the fact that it works for you isn't a statement that has any truth value, in the sense of, well, yeah, it doesn't work overall though. Doesn't work for the community of sentient beings. It's just a stupid argument. So I'll play some of it. We'll just get through it. I'll just play little clips and fuck it. It's just a waste of time. Some of it's on Redshift, but not much. He puts that in here, but there wasn't anything rational on the subject except they make a prediction and the needle goes the right way, and so it's proven. Some kind of crap like that. So I've made the argument that you can't really understand Redshift if you don't even understand how photons are created. And I'm not even saying I have a certain understanding. I'm just saying that it's kind of vague knowledge of exactly how photons are created, or how you actually receive them. And this whole argument about our functionality, in the sense that we can be retarded in our functionality, creates a syndrome where you might be able to argue that time dilation might even cause redshift. I'd rather not use the word time dilation, because time doesn't get fucking dilated. Excuse my fucking French, but it just is so stupid. Metabolism retardation could cause redshift on both ends, the emitter end and the receiver end. And that anything blue shifted is just blue shifted, its velocity is greater, that it overcomes the redshift that comes with having velocity. So the component of redshift from retarded metabolism is smaller than the proportion of redshift due to the fact that you're actually moving and depositing photons onto a moving road, so to speak. But anyway, I obviously have a completely different model of photons. And, you know, let's be clear. The more you dig into this, the more their mediums become obvious, and they're sort of running away from them. So, you know, there are certain individuals, I'll read the Case for Reality guy, you know, they're obsessed about what the implications are of, say, a particle field in the universe and the fact that it causes friction. And yet they can create all kinds of fields, electrical fields, magnetic fields, and bent space. And all of those somehow don't have any friction problem. Somehow they're not active in any other way in the universe because they're magical. You know, they don't have to have any properties. They don't have to be, they can be God-like. Just as I said, these are just God-of-the-gap solutions. They just created magical forces instead of explaining physical forces. And yes, that's so much easier because you don't have to be accountable. Tinkerbell doesn't go to the bathroom. It's just so easy. We don't, you know, you can make it so it's just much harder to find that way. You know, when there's no Tinkerbell outhouse anywhere. You know, it's just the fact that when you make a fairy tale, your claims aren't as disprovable because nothing has to be real. Nothing has to have real properties, real consequences for its existence. It's like dark matter. They create it, and yet they don't account for the fact that the extra gravity they created would cause planets to move in that direction. You know, simple things like that. And he uses this in the argument about, I don't remember the exact, he was saying something about, I think it was directly related to velocity, but I can't remember. Well, anyway, I'll remember it later and point it out. So it begins, well, I'm just going to start it in some location. 22 seconds.
Well, a guy in the comments says to him, so you're saying there's no such thing as redshift? I think he doesn't know how to agree with somebody.
Why? Yeah. Why would I agree with a statement like that? I see. I mean, this guy is so clueless. Why would I agree with a statement that there's no such thing as redshift when I think redshift does exist and it's fully mechanical and fully real? Why the fuck would I agree with that? I don't think that redshift is caused by expanding space, by stretching space. So that's what you have to understand. Is to see they're creating all these mediums. And he makes the argument in here, so yeah, this is the one I forgot, about there's no one's arguing that it's a pull force. No one's arguing it's a pull force. Of course you are. Because if they made bent space a push force, then they'd have to account for the velocity problem, the friction problem again. So they have to make it a pull force so they don't have anything on the outside to account for. There's no residue left over. So they're all push forces. String theory's a rubber band. It can't be a force of pressure on the outside. None of them will create a pressure on the outside because the pressure on the outside requires them to understand what the nature of inertia or velocity is. And this whole conversation about redshift does get quite complicated because of, you know, obvious circumstances. Well, not obvious, but ones you will encounter if you do a little thinking on the subject. Like two objects could have set velocities in two different directions. Now its velocity is this way, that's all. Okay, it got shot out of a gun. It has a straight velocity this way and a straight velocity this way. Yet the two objects are creating more distance between them. So they obviously have some sort of, you know, illusionary velocity in these directions. It's not a real velocity because there's no component of it, and you can kind of figure out there's no component of it because if I put another line over here, I can't create a circumstance where it has a component of velocity in this direction and a component of velocity in this direction because the two directions would be competing with each other essentially. So you can't break it down and say, okay, there's a component in these directions. It's complicated. And the argument I would make is that, yes, perhaps the reason why the universe is so redshifted is because the default state is that anything that has velocity is slightly redshifted, I mean proportional to its velocity, so that's not there's not much redshift till you get to the the higher end of velocity. But anything moving creates a redshifted velocity on the photons it emits at any angle perpendicular. The tangential angles to its velocity, all those photons would be redshifted, regardless of whether it's moving towards your focus, where you're looking, where you're standing. I don't even see. There's no. My velocity would be irrelevant if I was standing still, and so this whole idea of moving towards me doesn't really make sense in some respects. But clearly it gets complicated. And we're back to this argument about the circle, and the only time you're really moving towards something is when you invade the circle. If I invade the circle at all, then I've moved towards something, but only then. But yeah, so it gets complicated when you consider this redshift stuff. And I'm just arguing there's simple explanations why everything seems redshifted. You don't have to create this fake nonsense that space is expanding and that the photons are on strings or rubber bands that makes all of the photons stretch. I mean, that's their explanation. And you say, no, I think there's something more mechanical involved. And I think the very idea of stretching photons while they're in transit is bullshit. is more than ether. It's double ether. And so why don't they just fess up that all their theories contain whatever they call a force? Whenever they say a force or a field, what they really mean is an ether, a layer of ether glue. But they're afraid to say that. Jump ahead.
Rearticulate and...
Not a great point to jump ahead to. Rearticulate and... So, it's just, he argues about the argument and then he makes such poor arguments in terms of he'll say something and then retract it in the next sentence.
The idea of redshift and the photon expanding in space because space is expanding is ridiculous. Well, that's kind of what we mean by redshift.
Right, and that's why I said it's ridiculous. I'm making the argument of why I think that isn't the answer. That the answer is simpler than that, and the answer has to do with the admission of a photon, the mechanics of emitting a photon, and the mechanics of receiving a photon. And the simplest analogy is the idea that basically I'm arguing that photons, their frequency is like the frequency of bullets. The tons don't have any length. They're just bullets. And how fast I fire them out of the gun is the frequency. And if I'm moving towards you, the frequency is going to change. Not how fast I pulled the trigger, how fast you're going to receive them. And if I'm moving away, exactly the opposite will happen. The trigger speed will not be the deciding factor. The deciding factor will be the fact that my motion is away, and I will deposit the bullets into a cold universe that doesn't care how fast I'm pulling the trigger.
So, yes, you're saying redshift as we conceive it, as a Doppler effect, doesn't happen, yeah?
Yeah, and that's what I've done, and there's nothing wrong with the way I've done it and how I've done it. And so what is this whining about it? Make a counter argument or fuck you. What is this shit? Yeah, we disagree. And I think the evidence is on my side. And we don't have evidence that we should have because, yeah, for no good reason, they haven't stuck a small telescope even in the shuttle to look at the edge of the sun and see if there's anything getting lands there, as per the New York Times headline. Even on the anniversary of the fucking theory, they couldn't prove it.
Now, if it doesn't happen, then in that way, that is not an explanation for the observed redshifts, but you accept that as redshifts, then are you saying that when we look at all these galaxies, work at the redshifts, that they're all flying away from us, ergo everyone except in our local cluster.
Well, again, see, you're saying they're flying away from us because you're saying redshift means this much velocity. I've already pointed out how those calculations are the very thing that ended up inventing dark matter. The fact that those calculations don't work inside of galaxies, and then they end up with velocities that they can't physically work, and that's why they have to create dark matter, is to try to fix it somehow. You're giving me this argument as if you've somehow established it with this volume of proof, and you don't have a volume of proof. You have little shreds of indications, a little seam-likes. You have a bunch of 2-slit experiments, and again, you're not accounting for all the single-slit experiments where it's nothing alike, or all the 15-slit experiments where it's nothing alike. I mean, I really don't think in water waves, right? If I put 15 poles in the water in between a slit, then I'm going to get a big wave in the middle, and and then nothing, and then a big wave over there, 15 degrees away. Yeah, I don't think that'll happen.
Andromeda's flying at us, yeah, but beyond the local cluster of gravitationally bound galaxies.
Yeah, well, that's not even true. There's crap way out there that's blue shifted. And the argument is there's lots of reasons why something can be blue shifted. One of the reasons is that you haven't properly calculated the chemistry of the objects that's emitting the light. You might not know what it's actually made out of, and that's why it's blue shifted. It's because it might not be like our sun. It might be burning something slightly different. I mean, the whole assumption of looking at our sun when we're moving towards our sun, the Earth is accelerating towards it, might not be the smartest thing to do either, and call that normal. Now let's jump ahead a little.
I suppose if you put your mind to it now, what you will end up saying, predictably, is they're lying. They're experiments. It's not good evidence.
Okay, they're lying. I've never said that. So just again, you can't be at all disciplined or accurate in anything you say. You just make these gross generalizations. All the galaxies are moving away from it. Everything in the universe is right. Every question, every prediction quantum mechanics ever made was brilliant and perfect. Blah blah blah, and it's just bullshit. This whole prediction thing, as I'm pointing out, Einstein's original prediction of gravitational lensing being even a photons being affected by gravity is still not proven by any kind of volume of evidence. And I've pointed out how the evidence that does exist is really cruddy. It's got lots of flaw in it. The lensing photographs are nonsensical to the other laws of gravity, and our solar lensing experiments are crap. They're full of error code.
It's not good evidence. No, not even. It's really not happening at all.
Right. So nobody's allowed to question an experiment's veracity. They're all great experiments. Nobody except a talking head, apparently. So the only ones who are allowed to say an experiment sucks is some talking head who have every reason to keep their mouth shut, even if they think something sucks, because being wrong can ruin your career. So they have every reason to just shut the fuck up and not say a goddamn thing, even if they think gravitational lensing is bullshit. And again, I've pointed out so many ways. He's talking about the laser beam in the gravitational lensing experiment. That's the last thing I was complaining about. I was just saying they can't do the measuring the movement of the Earth because it's a 14 gigahertz beam, that they don't care how wide it is, they don't care how anything it is. The only thing they care about is that it has perfect phase symmetry. That's it. I listened to the guy who engineers the laser. He's standing right in the room with all the glass rooms with all the freaking high-powered voltage to run the laser. He's the guy who runs the fucking laser, and he blatantly says, look, we're not trying to make a precisely round beam or a small beam or any of that shit. We're just trying to do one fucking thing and make sure the beam is perfectly in phase, no noise. That's not the kind of beam you need to do the how much is the Earth moving experiment, Dumbo. Clearly the whole frickin' LIGO thing is engineered for one thing. Because you would think it would be one hell of a great earthquake predictor in a sense, if because it's got great ears. But they don't have it tuned to that. And so we don't get any secondary benefits from it because the thing is tuned to a noise nothing is making. And look, and all my arguments against LIGO have all been arguments about what they say they heard, which is this preposterous. Why don't you explain to me how two black holes moving half the speed of light don't hit each other? Why don't you first explain that to me? How when they come in from space, they don't just crash into each other by the rules of gravity. And let's say they miss each other. Why don't you explain to me how they don't fly the fuck right past each other then? Why don't you explain to me how they get caught in a spiral? A little tiny spiral. And then why don't you explain to me how 2 solar masses worth of fucking matter is converted into what has to be called an anti-gravity wave, because it's got to be plus, not minus force, right? It's not attractive force, it's completely repulsive force. So in a sense it's a bunch of what I would call quantons, a big giant wave of them. It's anti-gravity, not gravity. When it hits something, it's going to push it the fuck away. And so why don't you explain how those 2 solar masses of quantons or whatever things go through the universe, didn't disturb anything in the local area at all, come all the way to the Earth, and push us. Fuck. The illogic, that's LIGO's failure, is that 3 bears Goldilocks story of a bullshit story. Because you can't make it make any sense.
Oh, the beam's splitting, so you can't tell, you can't...
Right, okay, so you point out that beam splitters don't create 2 identical beams. That the 2 beams are quite different. One is diffracting at a very high rate, while the other one doesn't diffract to the last segment of the experiment. You point that out, and what's his response? It's not an argument. It doesn't mean anything. That's irrelevant. The whole point of the beam splitter is to create 2 equal beams. That's the assumption made. You point out how the assumption is flawed and wrong, and what does he say? Well, gee, they really should have an explanation for that, because that's fundamentally the assumption in the experiment is you have 2 equal beams. If you don't have 2 equal beams, the experiment's pointless. I mean, you're just a disgustingly dishonest and disingenuous pile of shit.
Whatever it be, the dial, the digits, the beep bops. Yeah? Good model. That's one.
Right. So he says everything that physics has done, they predict something and then they get just the right measurements and everything's just fine. And we know it's not just fine. That they have all these, the glue is everywhere. The dark matter, dark energy, create all kinds of multiverses to fix string theory. I mean, all kinds of bizarre and incredible stories about how the photon creates a bunch of infinite waves ahead of it, and then those waves interfere, and then that tells it where to go, and that's ding. No, that's going bonk, bonk. Wrong answer. You got to do better than that. Wrong answer.
Way of measuring the quality of a physics theory. That it says, do this, then this happens.
Right. They did that, and they can't even get they can't every 17 months they change the weight of a proton. I mean, they kept changing the speed of light, and then finally they made the constant. They made the speed of light a constant by written rule. Now everything else has to adjust to the speed of light because the speed of light was always changing. I mean, so go ahead, defend your religion, okay? Fine, I get it. You're a devotee, okay? But you're making an argument to me that somehow supposed to persuade me that it's okay that they don't have really good evidence of lensing. It's okay that they've never pointed the Hubble telescope anywhere near the sun to see something getting moved by it. It's okay that half mirrored beam splitters don't create two equal beams. It's okay that the whatever backward upside down experiment relying on polarization, it's okay. So what if polarization filters aren't 50-50? That assumption wasn't critical to the results. It wasn't. I mean, fuck.
Model in standard physics. This also makes the same predictions within its model, and its model is a little bit abstract and therefore less grounded in concrete reality and mechanism.
Right, it's completely just a God theory, right? And so why should physics, why should a scientist, why should somebody of a scientific bend sit there and say, oh yeah, let's just make up fairy tale characters that are all invisible because it makes our job so much easier here. So why don't the police always do that? They just show up at the crime scene and say, Invisible Man did it. Obviously. We're done.
Could be a criticism. But its alternate advantages is, and this being QED, for example, quantum.
Okay, so quantum electrodynamics, which is quantum mechanics now, he's going to talk as if it's a thing. It's one thing. It's not one thing. It's not even close to being one thing. So again, it's like you either accept it all or you accept none. But you can't find any element of it that's worthy of critique. And then he's going to give this idea of quantum electrodynamics, which includes obvious things like the invention, the discovery of charge, that charge exists. I mean, once you know that charge exists, plus and minus, and that charges, especially on conductors, will not, okay, they'll migrate. They will not stay unbalanced. They will balance. Then you know that two plates are going to have to decide, one of you is negative and one of you is positive. Because you know that they have to, there can't ever be a space that they could be, the closer you bring them, the more their atomic nature is going to be revealed, and they're going to have to align. They can't have positive butts up against positive butts. That's not acceptable by the charge rules. So of course one of them is going to have to be negative and one of them is going to have to be positive. You don't need QED for that. You just have to know the existence of the concept of charge. So he's saying the concept of charge is QED. Every single concept we know about the relationship between photons and electrons is QED. And therefore every prediction made, even on obvious things, is therefore part of the magic of quantum mechanics. Heisenberg. No, you don't need Heisenberg to understand the rules of charge. You don't have to believe in Huygens to understand charge. I mean, it's such bullshit.
Electrodynamics, which yields explanations for all of chemistry.
So there you go. Explanations for all of chemistry. And that's just such an insanely inappropriate statement. Because what is chemistry but a lot of it's magnetism, measuring the charges. So again, the understanding the implications of charge, the fact that if there's an electron missing, there's a hole there that an electron could fit in, that kind of puzzle making is somehow you have to agree that Huygens is a real concept, a real principle. You have to agree that Heisenberg is a real principle to understand how chemistry works. Bullshit. Absolute bullshit. Quantum mechanics is not one thing, it's a bunch of shit. And it's just nonsense to sit there and play this game that you can't sit there and say 5% of it's rubbish and throw it out.
Right, which is essentially, as Feynman put it, QED is essentially all of physics because it's all of chemistry.
Yeah, well the argument is the relationship between tons and electrons is all of the force mechanics essentially in the universe. That's right. All the action. That's 95% of the action in the universe. Yeah, so what? What does that have to do with quantum electrodynamics and Huygens or Heisenberg?
it gives you the covalent bonding, the ionic bonding.
Well, it says you. So again, no. All of those things have individual premises and axioms that those discoveries or those understandings were based on, and none of them were some blanket of quantum mechanics. No. I mean, the idea that probability, that the lottery was invented by quantum mechanics because it has probability in it. I mean, this is grotesque to sit there and keep pretending that quantum mechanics gave us drinking water. Fuck you. Bullshit.
The van der Waals bonding, all the...
Right, and it's called Van der Waals instead of quantum bonding. Because some person, okay, modeled it out using portions of the principles involved in quantum mechanics. Not all of them.
The forces, it gives...
all the forces. So again, the forces are completely not understood. They use words for virtual photon. They use annihilation operators in their mathematics to describe things that aren't really annihilating anything. So fuck you and this bullshit.
X, your superconductivity, your...
Yeah, again, all of these things were natural discoveries based on the implications, logical implications. So none of them were invented because you knew Heisenberg existed, therefore you could invent superconductivity. No. Huygens is not necessary.
What's the plates called? The Casimir effect. The force between two plates when there's such a time.
Yeah, so yes, like I said, that's just logical deduction. Once you establish the existence of charge and once you establish Maxwell's laws, Maxwell could have predicted that. The fact that, he didn't predict everything he could have predicted, but I mean, clearly Maxwell could have predicted that because Maxwell knew full well that if you have a circumstance where there's no set charge, there'll have to be one if you bring two things close enough together. One of them will have to go all negative, one of them will have to go all positive.
The gap, surface tension forces.
Again, all of this is just such bullshit. Just sit there and say this one thing. It's like these Tesla nuts, like Tesla invented everything. The entire industrial age couldn't have happened without Tesla, and it's just a crock of shit. Fuck. You fanatic.
Light diffraction.
Yeah, and I've only pointed out the huge flaws in that understanding. I mean, it's amazing you bring that up. Like somehow they have this, oh yeah, they've proven that. They got all that figured out. Not even close. Just disgusting.
Evidence for it. Yeah, has it got good evidence for it? Same with general relativity. You can not like the evidence.
It's not about liking, it's about saying it's not good enough for a conclusion. For fuck's sake. Nobody's allowed to say your weak evidence is weak evidence. It's grotesquely underdeveloped evidence. I've already made the analogy. If anything important was riding on it, you'd have to be one big fucking asshole to say, go ahead, kill somebody for my confidence in this shitty evidence. It's that bad.
But it is evidence.
It is evidence. So it's shitty, but it is evidence. Therefore what? I'm supposed to bow to it. No, I'm not. I've considered it. Yes, it is evidence. And there's a lot of other evidence that points the other way, like the single slit experiment, for example. And you consider that and you say, well, wait a minute, there's probably a better explanation because this evidence sucks.
And if you want to be very forceful and say that it is not good evidence, then you need to get technical criteria.
Oh, whatever. Fuck you. I've already been as technical as they are. They don't even have the fucking width of the slit in their math, you bozo. Giving me a lecture on being technical. Oh, well, just, in the single slit, it's, there's Huygens, double waves are created. But double slit, no, there's single point source. Fuck the Huygens thing, it's just going to get in the way. Yeah, that's real technical. Fuck you.
of the setup of the experiment, that which is pretty much not available, right?
Yeah, that's right. So you don't really have any experimental evidence that's directly correlatable to these thought experiments, and yet you're just talking like you know it. Yeah, well, I'm sure it happens that way. You know, that's what they say. Yeah, you're being real technical.
Therefore, you can't make that
Douchebag.
criticism. Yeah? You can guess at it and say you're guessing at it and say, I don't trust these people.
No, I can say that it's biological deduction. I can point out how it's paradoxical, and that's what I did. You're establishing photons that behave just like baseballs. The baseball increases its velocity to do what you say it does. Well, if the photon is going to do exactly what the baseball is going to do, it's going to have to increase its velocity to get to the location. There, I pointed out the paradox. I pointed how your stupid idea really can't work. So yeah, time to start over, fuckheads. You're riding the wrong fucking unicorn.
Engineer working with and understanding the problems of divergence, of the limits and the convections and the...
Right, so he's sitting there saying it's not good enough that I watched the documentary, actually saw the guy who's in charge of the laser, actually heard him say the words, okay? We don't care about how wide the beam is, we don't care about nothing. We just want one thing, we want a beam that's completely coherent. Every single... the frequency is pure. No erroneous frequencies.
Says, yeah, he's almost, did I say, an engineer? He's a different beast to the theorist. Now, are you saying that, yeah, well, it appears to me, you're saying it can't be done? When the LIGO experiment, they said, you know...
I never said anything like that. I never said LIGO can't detect discrete and small vibrations. Never. Now there are insane claims that at 2 light years they can measure the distance of a human hair or something. When they say silly things like that, I said, yeah, that they're not doing. They're fucking lunatics. But the point that I've argued is the thing they're saying they're hearing is the thing I say can't happen. Shithead. We haven't even established that black holes exist, and they're saying, we heard 2 of them crashing at preposterously high speeds in ways that gravity doesn't allow. And you bought it. Well, I'm not buying that.
The train, 10 miles, 2 miles, whatever it is, when it goes past, it can shake them out of the line.
Yeah, well, I won't bother with this because, again, I've never made a video saying LIGO can't hear at all. I just said it's not doing what they claim they've done. It's better used as a seismograph. Because what they're looking for, it doesn't exist in the first place. And even if it did exist, they're not going to hear it.
It's just, that's not correlated. When it detects earthquakes and vibrations in the planet from the other side of the...
So again, none of these... I've never made any claims about that. Never said a damn thing about LIGO not being a sensitive instrument that can hear, that will pick up vibrations. Of course it will. The argument is whether it heard from 5 light years away 2 black holes do something physically impossible. That's the question, Jack for ass.
Well, that's not happening. Yeah? It's a technical difficulty. You're telling them it's a technical difficulty, which is impossible to correct for, is impossible to make allowances for.
No, that's regarding Pirro's argument about the experiment. I said, yeah, it'd be really nice to use LIGO, and they still probably could, but they can't do it with the laser beam they're using because the laser beam they're using is a big, giant, messy, sloppy one that does just one thing, and that is have perfect phase correction. They don't care about wasted light. They don't care. They're using a laser that's incredibly powerful. So obviously the amount of energy they're wasting is huge of the light. They're only going 4 miles. Why do they need a 15 gigahertz laser or whatever the fuck it is? Obviously they don't. But they need the very fact that they're focused on one thing means the laser gets wider and wider and less lasery because they're looking for one thing, which is this stupid phase.
And you say this without any details of the technical problems.
Again, well, that's partly LIGO's fault because they don't provide them. So yeah, we publicly fund this crap, and somehow the information doesn't end up public. Why? Because all these scientists have special interest in capitalizing on secrecy. Well, what the hell's the bullshit there? But I mean, did you read the Forbes article? I mean, they don't even counter-argue. When somebody makes a claim against them saying, well, we analyzed your data and it appears to us that you do have random error coincidences between your two operations. And their response is, we don't think so. Oh, so everybody else has to be technical except the scientists doing the experiment. They don't have to be technical. Got it. Sure. Okay, boss. I have to be more technical. They don't have to be. Like explain how two black holes don't collide into each other. How they get into orbit around each other, which is by Einstein's gravity impossible unless they hit something. Unless something slows them down.
They have surmounted. And the technical specification of the plant. Yeah? You watch a lay documentary on it, which gives you the very basic principles.
Well, it really wasn't the very basic principles, because obviously they wouldn't be going inside the laser room and talking about things like phase if it was just the very basic principles. God, fuck you. I mean, just keep making rationalizations for your Jehovah. Okay, I get it. I get it. We don't have anything to talk about. You don't want to argue the logic. You don't want to argue the paradoxes. You don't want to argue the reasonable points I've made. You just want to keep changing the subject to their authorities, and you're not. Well, okay, fine. Fuck you. We're done.
Well, that's just fucking stupid.
Yeah, well, you're fucking stupid. So anyway, I have to get to his next video, whatever piece of shit that is. But anyway, we'll move on to... Yeah, I know. It's so bad. This. Yeah. 42 minutes. Damn, I didn't want to go that long. Alright, well, some star of Sagittarius. He calls himself Philosophy Matters now. But, you know, he's been rude enough on my other channels that I really have no patience for him. But anyway, he made a video about light, and it's just nonsense. And the comment covers it. Can the speed of light change in different locations of the universe based upon factors of supernova, black hole, or regular star? The point is that we have no evidence of something moving faster than the speed of light. Anything in the universe ever moving faster than the speed of light. So what's the fruit of this stupid speculation about perceivers and what happens inside of a black hole and all this other bullshit? Because there's no evidence of it. So why is this an important question to you? It's a pretty well established fact that there's just no fucking evidence. There's there's no evidence of real miracles by God because there's no evidence of somebody who grew an arm. The evidence is silly evidence like, you know, my fingernail was crooked and now it's straight. I mean, God's miracles have always been, you know, nothing important. You know, nothing visible. So what's the point? And the same things with this argument. Why do you have a problem with the idea that the fundamental forces of nature are likely the same thing and they move it at an elemental speed, one that's just elemental, that doesn't change? Why is this obnoxious to you fucking idiots? But why should I have to waste my time commenting on it? Show me some evidence of something moving faster than the speed of light. Show me where information moves from one place to another faster than the speed of light. And then I'll waste my time with this crap. But if the only experiment you got demonstrating that is one based on a whole bunch of wrong assumptions about polarization, then yes, I'll take a bye. Thank you very much. Fuck. Alright, case for reality. Last comment. You begin by asking if we'd be impressed if you turned out to be right. Honestly, I wouldn't. So it's just kind of funny. Somebody unifies physics and he wouldn't be impressed. Whatever. Because I'm not impressed when someone gets it right by accident from following their gut instinct. Well, that didn't happen. So go ahead and again just malign the last 5 or 6, 7 years that I've spent wasting most of my free time watching physics lectures. So just ignore that I had to do a lot of getting up to speed to be able to make these arguments, you stupid cunt. And it wasn't some gut instinct, it was reasoning that led me to pursue this. Because you silly people had 17 descriptions of how photons go through 2 slits. Copenhagen, many worlds, whatever the other wacky thing is, and there was at least 3 others. A bunch of silly explanations that all involved magic properties. And somebody who has any kind of reasonable instincts about what evidence looks like or what logic looks like, somebody who believes in like evolution instead of a god, yeah, that kind of person should be a little bit disturbed that this is what they're saying reality is. These overt fantasy stories. All right, anyway, you obviously became really emotional whenever people mention certain words like chaos. Well, again, you know, if you're going to sit there and say chaos is smart, then yeah, I'm emotional because it's just so fucking stupid. And yeah, why should anyone have to argue with people who are that oxymoronic, who sit there right in the middle of their own statement and contradict themselves? Anyway, dimension, function, geometry. But so far I haven't heard one argument for you why gravity cannot be explained with geometry. I'm saying it's not an explanation of anything physical. It's not physics. You're not explaining how it slides down the geometry. How does the geometry make it move? It's just kind of silly to say the universe in reality is made of little straight lines and somehow planets know how to slide down straight lines. It's fucking idiotic. It's as idiotic as putting a weight in a bunch of spandex and saying, there's gravity. That's how the universe works. Fuck. Alright, well, yeah, so you being impressed is probably the least of my problems. So, fuck you, you're an idiot. But guess what? General relativity is based on differential geometry. No, it's based on the inverse square law and a lot of other physical facts, okay, that can be established, but it's just finding a synthetic replacement, a cause for the inverse square law. That's all it's doing. And the cause is a god of the gaps. The cause is Tinkerbell. The cause is the invisible man. Anybody could draw the stupid geometry. The geometry is retarded. Why would I draw a drain? I mean, as a representation of gravity, why would I bother? Do you think that the geometry is special geometry? It's just duplicating the inverse square law, for fuck's sake. It's not very complicated geometry, retard. Anyway. Objects aren't pulled towards the Earth. They simply follow a geodesic on a space-time manifold. Yes, a manifold. What is that? A space-time manifold, which is warped by gravity. Again, which is warped by turning it into a drain. An inverse square drain. That's what the real scientists think. Well, whatever. And I'm arguing that is just premising your reality and saying the 3 bears made platypuses. It's a silly reason for why there's platypuses. And they didn't think this because they feel in their gut. Well, I think they did, and that's exactly what it's always been from the start. Nobody wanted a cold physical explanation. And you'll never understand that because you ignore evidence. Well, that's just a lie, you piece of shit. You still can't understand that the beam splitter doesn't turn the beam inside out. Where did I say it turns it inside out? So why don't you just lie some more? You're just such a disgusting liar. Oh, insane liar. Upside down and in fact diffract, question mark. So again, just ignore what is, in my opinion, undeniable fact. That you can't sit there and say Heisenberg is a principle and this piece of film obeys that principle, and that you have some kind of special powers where you don't have to obey that principle when you make a beam splitter. The same principles involved. Okay, and your argument for that is because you heard a professor say smaller slits cause more diffraction. That's not why I say it. I already knew that. Newton's rings demonstrates that. So you don't need to do any of listening to a professor. I'm just giving you the argument that an MIT professor, a pretty high standard of physics, know it. I mean, people pay 30 grand to get into that school a year, jackass. That he probably knows what he's talking about when he says something like, well, yeah, this is kind of the tendency. You make the slit smaller, the diffraction gets wider because you're creating more information about location, and as you create more information about location, you have less information about destination. But go ahead and ignore that. Fine, I don't care. I mean, you're just amplifying exactly my point. So to preserve your religious notion, you'll say the professor's an idiot, which is my argument. So thank you. You're conceding my point. Your physics is poorly founded, inconsistent, contradictory. It doesn't have any continuity. It's not logical. All right, that's not the bloody point. Well, it is the point. The math that emotionally triggers you into hysterical fits of stupid anger says there's no interference pattern. Well, I keep saying it. I asked you to show me this math. Show me the math that says there's no interference. That you can make small slits and you create less diffraction. Go ahead, show me that. I haven't seen it. It's not in any of the formulas. There's no limitations on the formulas. The formulas don't say you can't make the slit smaller. And it doesn't say, there's no warning saying this formula breaks down, once you make the slit a certain size. All right. I mean, as long as the slit's big enough for a photon to get through, the fact is that photon's not going to go straight through by the Heisenberg rules. All right. And what if it did? Then the beam disperses, and all that's left of the beam that got reflected. Then the beam disperses, and all that's left. The point is you're combining the two beams as if you're combining them back into a whole again, and clearly you're not. You don't even have anything close to maybe 50% of the light you started with, and it's not in the same condition. It's been brutalized. A bunch of noise has been put into the signal that you're trying to detect. So your signal is going to disappear because you've created too much noise to hear it. You're not scientific enough to understand that problem of noise to signal ratio. Of course not. You can see pictures of the beam splitters working. Where? I said already, look, you want me to play the MIT guy, the one from like the 70s or whatever it is, with the lasers, and you can see it. Okay, he puts a card in front of the two beams, and one beam is 3 times bigger than the other. I'm just saying. So you're going to keep saying you can see something? No, I saw it already. I saw that the two beams aren't the same. I saw it with my own eyes. I don't need to see it because I saw it. Idiot. What are those? Photoshopped. Well, again, where can I see the beam splitters working? I'm saying, where do you have evidence of the beam splitter tested and demonstrated over a mirror that moves it maybe 18 or 20 feet, and it shows that the two beams are exactly the same size after that 18 feet? Where have you done that? Where do you have evidence of that? And you keep yammering on and on about evidence. Okay, well, I'm just saying, okay, it speaks for itself. Anybody who has any integrity at all will understand what I've said, and it's obvious that I'm not obviously wrong because none of these people have responded to the point I made about Michelson-Morley. There hasn't been one fucking rational argument saying how I'm wrong. Except this mush. Saying I'm wrong based on the premise that it didn't happen, and if it did happen, it still doesn't matter. Yeah, right. Most of the evidence in physics is mathematical. So again, that's just a lie. Nonsense, silly. And I have nothing against mathematics in the sense of understanding relationships and the formulas that describe those relationships. It's when you start making up mathematical rubbish, which you can do. You can contrive mathematics, and there's a lot of contrived mathematics. The thing that triggers, it's irrelevant what triggers me. You're not making a counter argument, you lame asshole. The math makes a prediction. Again, show me the prediction. Show me where Einstein's predictions have been proven. Show me the proof. Proof. Jeez, you don't understand the concept of proof. Proof isn't any evidence. Proof is good evidence. There's a difference between any evidence and good evidence. Then scientists go out and test it with real-world data. Again, real-world data includes what? We'll look at the two-slit experiment and compare it to water waves and say, ah, look, it's similar. And then we'll look at the single slit and compare that to water waves and say, no, let's not do that anymore. No. Let's go have ice cream instead. Because, yeah, that doesn't work for me. That evidence is not on my side. Clearly an obvious evasion. Just like the Hubble telescope not looking for solar lensing is an evasion. Most of the evidence in physics is mathematical. We already did that. Let's see, data, model known, thrown out. Let's see, test the real world data. Then if the data contradicts the prediction and the math model is thrown out. Well, again, you first have to know whether what the model's right or the math's right. So I'm just saying it's a lot more complicated than just doing a mathematical formula, as the whole argument about charge sort of illustrates. It's not really about a mathematical formula. It's about a conceptual understanding of the difference between plus and minus, and the fact that they're not compatible. Well, that they are compatible in the sense that the plus and plus isn't compatible, and the minus and minus isn't compatible. Alright, your gravity theory was thrown out in the 1800s. Well, it was thrown out in the 1600s, actually, idiot. Because of problems in the math. Well, again, there's no problems in the math if you have the right axioms or assumptions put into the math. You apparently understand how things obtain velocity. So you think you know that that electrons can carry momentum and that protons can carry momentum. And that you can shoot them across space anytime we want to. We could shoot electrons across space. We could shoot electrons to the moon if we wanted to. Because you understand velocity, and you understand what causes things to keep moving. So, yeah, you're capable of understanding what causes drag and what doesn't. No, you're not. You're an idiot. You don't understand the nature of these elemental forces, and you don't understand the nature of matter. You're just a dumb fuck who keeps claiming you know something. You don't know shit. Because problems in the math. So again, there's no problems in the math. There's problems in the assumption. If you use silly metaphors like, well, raindrops, if I run into rain, more rain hits me in the face than in the back. If you're going to use silly analogies, I mean, you already demonstrated you don't know what a kinetic is. Anyway, that's the evidence you ignore. What evidence? Yeah. You've had opportunities to look at the apps which model the 1-2 slit interference pattern. And I've already pointed out, I looked at the math. The math isn't complete math. It has no hope of modeling anything because it's wrong math. There's no slit width for the two slits, you idiot. God, we pointed out evidence for gravitational lensing. What evidence? And you resorted to a weird verbal tick about how you want to destroy the Hubble telescope. Oh, yes, right. So, obviously, I had, in previous videos, I've already been over this thing. There was never any argument about actually pointing the Hubble telescope at the sun. This had already been discussed, that there's lots of ways you can protect yourself from accidental incursions. And clearly this is the most pointable object humans have ever made. And you're not going to have any problem not going where you're not supposed to go. Oh, fuck. I mean, it's just, you know, it's what despicable rhetoric. And when somebody calls you on it, you do some weird denial of basic reality as if lens flares aren't a thing. They're not a thing in the sense that they're not a threat to the Hubble telescope. Or the sun isn't constantly spewing out massive amounts of white-hot plasma. Well, then how did they do the original experiment if this is all happening so often? I mean, it's just a silly argument. The sun, you can go, you know, hundreds of miles away from the sun is where the Edinburgh, the sun he used for that experiment, because they had to go further away because of the fact that there was still some corona from the sun. There was still too much light to see things really close to the sun. So they were thousands and thousands of miles away from the sun, the object they were looking at. So even if you're so afraid of the sun, you can do this from thousands of miles away. The object is still supposed to be lensed, idiot. So just you're the ones keep making excuses. Let's see. White hot plasma. Yeah, so congratulations on your undeserved feelings of accomplishment. Well, whatever. You sat at home, didn't do any fucking research besides watching physics lectures. Well, you know, to say those aren't of any value is really silly. And not absorbing any of the information. But you got it right. Well, as I've stated before, I've done a lot more than that in the sense that my entire working life was mechanical, but whatever. Because you're God. But scientists are the religious fanatics. I'm saying that they have no discipline as scientists. They clearly do just jump on bandwagons. They have no discipline, no caution. And it's just like the Edinburgh experiment getting on the front page of the New York Times. When the guy who did the experiment said, I wouldn't stake my life on these results. You know, so you have evidence that the guy wouldn't stake his life on, yet he gets a headline in the New York Times. And you're saying that's the way physics should work. I'm saying it's not. I just wonder sometimes, as a case of reality, you're seaweed with teeth. What would you ever know of gut instinct? Yours is so full of shit that your gut is numb and useless, so you have to rely on apps and Wikipedia. You're jealous, plain and simple. Well, it's a little excessively aggressive, but he's a douchebag, plain and simple. Alright, so Superior Mind says, let's see, I'm not impressed when anyone gets anything accidental gut instinct. Again, they just want to keep saying that